Hello. Can you hear me? Oh no. No, hold on.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay. Hello. How's it going?
I'm muted. There we go. Hi. I'm doing well.
Hello there. Are you ready for me to grill you?
I absolutely am.
All right. Can you hear me over my fan? It's like 1,000,000 degrees in here.
I was going to ask you the same question because I also don't have AC and I also have the fans going. Not too loud?
No, I can't hear it at all. So.
No, I think I have an AC and it's kind of loud, so I'm going to turn it off for the little that I'm.
I can't
we should be good.
Machines going anywhere. I think it's all good.
Yeah, I have to close the cats out, unfortunately, and then it gets hot in here. But if I didn't, they would just like run all over the keyboard and ask you rude questions, and it would be a big mess.
I mean, it'd be a new type of event.
Yeah, that's true. Cat book club. My hair is a mess. Ooh, quarantine hair.
It's too humid to care about hair right now.
I think you're all good. I like that shirt too.
Thank you. I just like randomly found it on the internet. Like you do.
Yep.
Alrighty.
All right, Gracie, I can hear you really well, but Anjali, I can not hear you as well.
All right, hold on. Let's see here. If I just hold it like that, is it better?
Yeah, it's a little louder.
Let me see. Let me try turning off the fan just in case it's.
No, I don't want you to melt. Don't do it.
Because I have my overhead fan, which is totally silent, but I also have this other one going. So let me just try turning off the small one.
Okay.
Okay. Just catching any RSVP stragglers.
How many people do we have?
It should be good. We have at least 11 people who have read the book and bought the book and are supposed to be here, so that should be good. I think in terms of schedule, I'll do a little intro, then disappear, and then I don't know. Are you comfortable, Liberty, like picking audience questions? I can send them to you in the chat if you prefer, just to have them in like a little block. If
you want to like. You mean me read through the audience questions and pick them?
No, I would read through and then send to you, so you have them in one.
That's fine. I can do that. I'm just gonna keep asking her questions until you tell me to stop. So.
Okay, that sounds good. I can also.
Alex mentioned asking her if, because I'm sorry, I didn't realize like Alex didn't work there anymore, and I didn't even know I was doing this till I read the newsletter a couple weeks ago. I was like, hey, that's me.
Okay.
Nobody knows about this. So he mentioned something about asking her to read if she wanted to. Anjali, is that something that you'd like to do?
Sure. Let me just grab the book real quick though, because I don't have it next to me.
Yeah, we just only found out at the end of last week, so I was kind of like, okay, well then. But I thought he'd been in touch with you.
No.
Well, I'm sorry about that. It's been kind of crazy.
I mean, I knew like we were going to do it at a later date. I just hadn't heard back about when that was. I was reading the newsletter and I was like, oh, hey.
That's me.
Well, I'm excited.
All right, we are good there. And I will say to both of you, as far as the questions, like, I feel like I've been asked every possible, like, I'm very laid back about the questions. I've had people be like super offended about certain aspects of the story, and we've talked about like anything. I'm just saying, like, I'm not edgy about anything. It's all good. Whatever people.
All right. So we'll let people know they can ask you anything. Any questions? Social security number. Anything. Ask you.
One of my first readings was in Pittsburgh, and that second story has like the guy working in the steel mill, and this woman was like, because I'm from Pittsburgh. She's like, well, my family worked in the steel mill, and let me tell you, it was no picnic. And I was like, whoa, okay. All right.
That has to do with what? It's crazy.
It's always interesting. But it's good. I am not terribly good at social media, but I really love talking to people, so it's all good.
Good. How has like virtual touring or events been?
It's been fine. I mean, I have not done a ton of it because the paperback had already been out for a year when everything. I feel really bad for my friends who, you know, like one of my good friends, her book just came out in February, and so like she had her whole tour schedule just mostly scrapped. She did do a bunch of online events, but I do think it's hard when it's like right at the beginning. It makes it hard.
It's a big adjustment. I think from what I've heard, people are happy to not have to travel so much. That seems to be like the one upside, but like miss actually being in a room with people. So kind of the balance of those two.
I would say both of those things are true. Well, and I did a lot of like college campus visits, and goodness knows you cannot be doing that right now. So
Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy. But I don't know, I feel like publishers have at least adapted pretty well. Like they seem to be on top of stuff, and I was pleasantly surprised because I did not think they would adapt so quickly, to be honest, but that's a good thing.
Well, I certainly have been reading more books than I usually get to read. So
yeah, I am.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Absolutely.
Anjali, I can't hear you. I can hear Gracie just fine, but I can't hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Barely.
I can hear you, but it's not, I don't know if it's as quiet. The other thing we could try is you could try.
Leave and come back in?
Yeah, you can try that, or you can try also connecting to the audio if you have a phone there, because sometimes it's like closer and clearer. It's a little laggy, but it tends to be louder.
Let me try, just because I've not ever had a problem with it. Let me try one time leaving and coming back in, and if that's okay, I will go get the phone.
Perfect.
Sorry. I'm just very hard of hearing, so I'm having a really hard time hearing her.
No problem. I wonder too, I'm trying to think if there's anything I can do on my end to fix the audio. Okay, let's see. Mm-hmm. Now we're at nothing. Uh-oh.
I broke it.
I think you're just muted.
Now. Any better? Or no?
Yeah, that's I say something else.
Yes. Can you hear me better now?
Yes. Yes, I can.
All right, good.
And I think it'll help too when I am done, I'll be muted, and then it'll have less audio feeds trying to play into it. So
yeah, I don't know. I think I tried to switch it to the other microphone, so maybe, I don't know. It offered me 2 choices of microphone, and I took the other one. So as long as you can hear me, I think
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for pushing ahead on that.
Oh, good. Okay, if you guys are ready, I'm gonna start letting people in, and I'll just do the intro quickly, and then Liberty, if you have the little like chat function open, I can let you know when we can switch to questions, and then
just like the Zoom group chat, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. Alrighty. Righty. Welcome everyone. We're just letting people trickle in a little. I'll start with a short introduction just to get us started. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I'm Gracie, I'm the events coordinator for print. Just a few housekeeping details before we start. If you have any questions during the event, please feel free to enter them in the chat box, which is on the bottom right of the screen. And if you'd like a copy of all the names we use for God, I can include the link to the print page in the chat as well, so you can click right through. And now just a really short introduction of our speakers. Liberty Hardy is the senior editor at Book Riot, and she lives in Maine with her 3 cats, Malay, Farak, and Zevon, who are not joining us tonight physically, but in spirit, they will be here.
Yeah. Shut out.
They'll be, crying outside the door. It's like the same thing. Anjali Sachdeva's fiction has appeared in the Iowa Review, Gulf Coast, the Yale Review, Alaska Quarterly Review, the Literary Review, and the Best American Non-Required Reading. She's a graduate of the Iowa's Writer Workshop and has taught writing at the University of Iowa, Augustana College, Carnegie Mellon University, and University of Pittsburgh. So please join me in virtually welcoming Anjali Sachdeva and Liberty Hardy.
Hey, everybody.
Hello. Anjali, this is so exciting.
I am super excited to meet you and to talk to everybody. I have to say, Liberty, I think I may have told you this in an earlier email, but like when my book first came out, yours was one of the first like big tweets that was really like said kind things about it, and it just made my it did really. So
well, that's great. I'm kind of excited because I've never done a book discussion for a collection of short stories before, so I feel like I get to ask you about like 9 separate books.
Yes.
I hope you're ready because I'm going to grill you. Yeah. But before we start that, would you do a little reading?
Absolutely. So let's see. I am going to just read from the very beginning of, let me think here. I'm going to do the very beginning of the first story, actually. And then I'm just going to do a short section. And then if people have something they particularly want to hear later, I'm up for doing another short section from something else.
Great.
But the first story is called The World by Night. And I'm just going to start at the beginning. Sadie was 16 when her parents died. And the gravedigger told her he would charge her less if she'd help him. Typhoid had killed so many people in town that he was tired of digging. Can we do it at night, she asked. Her skin could not weather the long hours in the sun, and in the glare of day, she would be nearly blind. He agreed, and so there they were, twilight till dawn, shaving slivers of hard-packed earth from the walls of the graves. They had the coffins lowered by morning, and the gravedigger looked at Sadie's flushed face and said, "Go on and get inside now. I'll finish this. I'll do it proper. You can have your own service tonight." "Aren't you afraid of me?" she asked. She'd been wanting to ask all night. When she was tired or nervous, her irises often jumped back and forth uncontrollably, as though she were being shaken, and she knew they were doing so now. It unsettled people, and more than one preacher had tried to cast spirits out of her, to no effect. The gravedigger looked at the earth for a long time, the pits with the bodies resting at the bottoms. "I saw another girl like you once at a freak show in Abilene," he said. "White skin and hair like yours, eyes like I never saw, almost violet. They called her the Devil's Bride, but I think she would have liked to have been married to a good man, tending chickens and baking biscuits just like anyone else. Anyhow, you're a fine digger." Now, Sadie is 20 and it is June, and her husband Zachary has been gone for 2 months, moving southeast across the Ozarks and maybe farther to look for work. She is not afraid of being alone. She was alone for 2 years before she met Zachary, and she had thought she would spend the rest of her life that way. Just knowing he will come back sooner or later is enough. She sleeps in the sod house through the bright hours of the day when most women do their chores, saves her work for early morning and dusk. When the dark has settled, she walks across the prairie, making her way by scent and feel. She finds some clumps of grass that smell like onion, others like sweet basil, others still covered in silvery down that tickles her fingertips. As the days pass, she saves up things to tell Zachary about when he comes home. A patch of sweet blackberries by the side of the pond where she draws the wash water. A hollow where a covey of grouse nest. Most important and mysterious of all, a hole in the ground with nothing but darkness inside, about the size of a barrel top. The grasses there move even when there is no breeze, and the hole breathes cool air. Once, she lowered a lantern into it at the end of her clothesline and saw a slope of jagged stone leading down, She stuck her head into the opening and breathed, and the air smelled just like the walls of her parents' graves. So I will stop there for now.
All right. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So before I start asking you about each of these stories, I wanted to ask you just like a general question about the collection. This is your first collection. This is your first book.
Yes.
And were these stories written with a theme in mind? Were they written even near at the same time, or did you write them over long periods of time?
Yeah, they were not written with a theme in mind. I wrote them over about 13 years. So
Whoa.
yeah, so a really long span of time. And I really actually, when I put the collection together, thought that there were no connections between them at all. But my agent, when I was ready to send it to publishers, did recommend to me that I write an introduction for the book. And so I think the process of writing that really forced me to ask myself if there was some connection between these that maybe I wasn't yet seeing. And if you have the paperback version of the book, the introduction is in there. And really what I found when I started thinking about them all was that they really had to do with, well, what do people put their faith in? For some people it's religion, for some people it's nature, for some people it's science. But I felt like all the characters and all the stories were looking for something to put their faith in one way or another. So that, I think one of actually the most interesting things for me about writing is that when you look at pieces you've written within a span of time after the fact, I can never see it in the moment, but when I look after the fact, I realize what was going on in my own head during that time span. I mean, the pieces I wrote in graduate school, I think, were all tragic love stories, but I would have never been able to tell you that at the time. But, you know, in the aftermath, it's glaringly obvious they're all tragic love stories. So it was the same thing. It was looking over all of them. I kind of realized that this was a big theme that I had been thinking about for years and years without being able to state that outright.
So I have just learned that I have not read the introduction. I've read the hardcover a few times, but you said introduction and I was going, did I say numbers and pages? But I do have a paperback copy too because the covers are so different and I love them both so much I had to have them both. And not to get away from discussing the book still, but you teach writing.
I do.
Yeah, and so when you're writing, do you find that you sometimes disregard your own advice that you give students?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, first of all, there's the advice that you give students is generally for people who are in the beginning stages of learning to write. And I think as in any artistic medium, you know, you learn those basics first, and then you have to break those rules at some point to be able to advance in your art. So I think that's part of it. But certainly I do have moments where, well, there's a story in this collection which is about John Milton writing Paradise Lost. And the whole time I was writing it, I thought like, ugh, writing about writers writing. I mean, that's such a bad idea. But in the end, I think it's maybe my favorite story from the collection. But it seemed like a bad idea starting out because I feel like that often leads to boring stories.
Not in this case, though. So I love every story, and each time I read the book, I have a different favorite story. And they're also singularly interesting to me that I just want to know the ideas behind each one. I don't want to keep you all night asking you, but we'll start with The World by Night. Like, where did this idea for this woman with albinism come from and having her go down into the caves?
Yeah. So, you know, that first section that I read where she's up on the prairie, so this entire story, I think, very much came from actual physical places that I've been that really just marked me in some ways. So that initial scene and all those scenes where she's on the prairie, I did do my graduate work at University of Iowa, and the first year that I was there, I lived in this, you know, 100-year-old farmhouse in the middle of a cornfield outside of town. And the landscape there, this like really classically Midwestern landscape where everything was so flat that you could see for miles, including like these huge thunderstorms and tornadoes coming towards your house. just really, I don't know, was like really imprinted on me in some way. And so there's that landscape in there. But then I also did a trip to Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky. And they have lots of guided tours, but one of them is this one where you, it's called the Wild Cave Tour, and it's like 4 hours of just crawling on your hands and knees through a cave. And it just, I don't know, it just was one of the most amazing things I've ever done. I highly recommend it if you're not claustrophobic. But part of what they talked about is that people have been doing tours down there since the 1800s. But in the 1800s, they would just go down with a candle lantern, obviously, because that's all they had. And they can show you these soot marks on the stone that they used to mark the various passages, because that's how they would keep track of where they were going. But it all just seemed so tenuous to me. Like, if you couldn't find your little soot mark, you were going to die down there. I mean, it just, you know, and part of what fascinates me with caves is, even now, you know, GPS doesn't work in a cave, your cell phone doesn't work, you're still very much at the mercy of the natural environment when you go down there today. So that element of danger, I think, was appealing to me. And how, I honestly do not remember how I chose to have her be a person with albinism, except that I think I was looking at these photos of people from the 1800s. And there were women, especially with albinism, who would be in these carnival sideshows, dressed up in kind of elaborate clothing and have their photos taken and traded around like trading cards. And it just was, you know, there was something profoundly sad about that to me, that they would live their whole lives under that stigma. And it fit with the time period that I was already imagining the story being. So that's how that angle came in.
Okay, now moving on to the second story, which is Glass Lung.
Yes.
Is any part of that based in fact? Is that explosion at the factory real, or is the expedition real? Right. I mean, I know the lightning in the sand is real, but I didn't know about that.
Real. There are pieces of fact here and there. So I'm from Pittsburgh. We're always learning about the steel mills. I mean, certainly there were all kinds of terrible industrial accidents in the steel mills at this time period, kind of turn of the 20th century. This exact type of accident is not real, but there is a real thing called atomized glass that occurs in explosions. So if you imagine an explosion where the windows of a building explode, under certain conditions, it does create these very tiny particles of glass that it's possible to breathe in. So that part is real. And then at the very end of the story, there is this, this green glass that they find in a pharaoh's tomb, and that is also a real thing. There's this type of glass found in the Sahara Desert that is incredibly pure silica. It's a sort of green color, and nobody knows where it came from. Some people think it was created by a meteor strike. Like, there's all these different theories about where did this crazy glass come from, but that is also a real thing. There's like bits and pieces of reality in there, but not any continuous line of reality, I guess I would say.
And are these things that just interested you, or did you go looking for them?
It's definitely, I do end up in a lot of internet rabbit holes, which is great as long as I don't get too lost and forget to do the writing. So I was reading about fulgurites, which is when the lightning strikes sand and it makes this piece of glass. And in the process of reading about that, I found out about this other type of glass, the green glass. But the very first part of this story was this image of, it started with a glass blower, like somebody doing that glass blowing where you have the long pipe with it, and just like accidentally breathing in the glass. But that's not really, you can't really do that. So then I don't know, I started thinking about what are some ways to transform that idea. Yes, I read many, many articles on glass that found their way into this in one way and another.
So now, Logging Lake, the third story. First of all, one of two stories with a Robert. Was that intentional, or did you get to it and go, oh wait, these guys are both named Robert, because there's a story later on, Robert's in the title. And also, did you have any idea what was going to happen when Robert and Tracy went into those woods, or did you just kind of follow them in there?
I just kind of followed them in there. So I will say that up until the point where they go into those woods, this was similar to a real trip that I took, because I did go to Glacier Park, not with a random date, but with a friend of mine. We were hiking and it was getting late, and we were like, we'll just camp at this campground. And we got there and we saw the wolf sign. There are wolves at this campground. Robert and Terry decided to keep going to the campground anyway. We were like, no way are we going to the wolf campground. We will find another solution. So that really was the point of departure from my inspiration, and I did not have an idea what was going to happen. But it was, again, one of those ones where the landscape really kind of started the story for me. And as to having two different stories with Robert's, so when I sent the manuscript to the editors and got it back from the copy editor, I had actually, I think, 4 or 5 characters named Robert across various stories. And I had never realized it. I don't know anyone named Robert. I think it just popped into my head as kind of a catch-all name. So I took most of them out, but those were the 2 that I left in.
So moving on, so Killer of Kings is the story about John Milton, which I have to admit, I don't know a lot about history. I had coincidentally just read somewhere that John Milton was blind when he wrote Paradise Lost. And then I read this story like the next week, and I was like, that's how I know who he is. That was amazing. And you were just saying earlier about how you ended up writing this story about a writer writing, and you were worried it was going to be like, a boring story to read about. And so I was going to ask you, where did you come up with the ideas of having the angels talk to him? Is that how you decided to make it an interesting story about a writer writing?
Yeah, so interestingly, John Milton actually claimed that an angel dictated this story to him. I mean, that was his
that part I did not know.
Yes, and I was an English major in college, and I took a couple of classes on Milton. The program I was in was very traditional, but one of the classes was with this professor that I absolutely adored, and one of the reasons was he really made these literary figures feel like real people. Like, he just would tell you so much of their history and biography. And so honestly, ever since I was an undergrad, this poem had held like a real magical quality for me. And so I just was excited to write about it. And to me, it was very much a story of, like, the mystery of that poem is John Milton was extremely religious, but the best parts of that poem are all the parts where the devil's talking. Like, the parts where God is talking, I'm going to be honest, get kind of boring. The devil's parts are like, all the parts that people quote from Paradise Lost are always the devil's parts. And so I was just thinking, like, how did this extremely religious person end up writing a book where the devil gets all the best lines? And that was what made it interesting to me. In my mind, it was very much a story about rebellion. And I think rebellion is always interesting. So, yeah.
How convenient that would be if everyone just had someone else dictate their stories to them and not take any of the credit.
I know. I'm waiting on my angel to come and just tell me.
So the next story, Robert Greenman and the Mermaid. First of all, I have to ask you, because I live here across the river from Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Yes.
Which is where Robert Greenman lives. And so I was wondering if you had been there before. And have you been to Maine?
I have been to Maine. I have not been to Portsmouth. I'm going to be totally honest. I started that story. It takes me literally years to finish a story. I started that story when I was in graduate school, and I just picked Portsmouth off a map. Like, I looked at the map, and I was like, there we go. You're on the coast and you're up in New England, and like, I'm just going to go with that. I have been to Maine, to Acadia and like areas around Acadia, but that has been my experience in Maine. It was beautiful though.
Oh, well, hopefully someday you'll get to come visit us again.
I would like that.
We're all allowed to leave the house again. So now I was curious, why is this set in present day, or seem close to present day? Like some of the stories, like on land, they take place hundreds of years ago, but like this one seems like it could have also taken place hundreds of years ago. It's just on a fishing vessel,
right?
So why present day?
because I partly was interested. I mean, that story to me is so much about what happens when magical experience comes up against rational thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like actually people in the past had a little bit more, I don't know what to say, like they had a little bit more magical belief in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Sure.
and so I wanted it set in the present day because I wanted it set in a world where really, if this main character Robert Greenman went home and told people, I saw a mermaid, I wanted it to be definitely clear that they would say, oh, you're mentally ill or you're
Mm-hmm.
hallucinating or whatever it is, you know. I wanted him to be up against that tension.
So now the next story, completely not based in reality at all, so far that we know of. So that one, I want to know, like, where did you come up with this idea? How did you decide what the masters were going to look like? You know, this, like, the whole thing is just so strange and cool.
Yeah, that one. So I always make myself start a new story on my birthday. This is one of these.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like I like a way to mark the day. This is one of those, and I had this idea of aliens cutting people's hands off, which I don't even know where that came from, honestly.
It's very specific.
And I was like, that's really weird. I need to think of something else. That doesn't even make any sense. But the day was wearing on and I didn't think of anything else. And I was like, fine, I'm just going to go with it. Because I don't finish every story I start.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing it, and the more I was working on it, you know, I think was reflecting on how dependent we are on our hands and how much
Mm-hmm.
our humanity, I guess, comes through our hands, right? That we are always not just manipulating things. It's not just about like you use them to do things. It's a lot of like you touch other people with them, and they're the way that we connect to other people in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
That idea was interesting to me.
And how did you decide that the masters were these big gelatinous blobs?
I did want it to some degree. I wanted them to seem innocuous and almost ridiculous, right? Like I didn't want them to be this big, scary monster. I wanted them to be something that people would be inclined to laugh at or to ignore. Because again, I think what's interesting to me here is like how much are people willing to put up with before they crack.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, like I think if the aliens show up and they're these huge terrifying beasts, people are immediately going to fight back. But if they're just this kind of gross snot creatures, people are maybe a little more compliant.
But I wonder if what you were saying about hands being such a big part of our humanity and our personality, if the fact that the masters don't have hands, like that was a way for them to, you know, sort of change people or show them who is in charge, or you know, make them more like them. Not really, because they're metal hands now, so definitely not gelatinous. But
yes, but I do think it is more right. It's that yes, they're kind of emphasizing their difference, or like the fact that hands have no meaning to them.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it, yes.
And that brings us to the last story, which Pleiades, is that how you say it?
I think it's Pleiades. Yeah.
Pleiades, yes. Not very good with my Greek names.
Okay.
So, I mean, I have a million questions always. Like, how did you decide there were going to be septuplets instead of, you know, sextuplets? And why did you decide to switch up narrators halfway through?
So, the septuplets thing, I really just from the beginning was thinking of this constellation because it's the other name for the Pleiades is the Seven Sisters. It seemed just like a good fit. And also the interesting thing about that constellation is that there used to be, like some people see more stars than others. It's used as some like test of visual acuity, like how many can you see? And so sometimes it's as if some of the stars have disappeared because they're so faint to begin with. Interesting. switching up narrators thing, I was heavily under the influence of Jane Ann Phillips' book Black Tickets, which has this character in it, or this story in it called El Paso, which also switches narrators. And this was another story that I started when I was in grad school. I had just read that book, and I think it was the first, if it wasn't the first story I read that switched narrators, it was the first one that ever really made an impression on me. And I was like, this is such a cool thing, I have to give this a go.
I've heard a lot of writers mention that collection as an influence, Black Tickets. Like it seems, and it doesn't seem to be on the shelves very often, but so many people talk about how great it is.
And I think it was even out of print at one point. It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. It's totally different. Like there's no magical element to it whatsoever. And so it's not that I usually do tend more towards the magic realism end of things. But that was incredible. I totally recommend it.
So you kind of answered this question earlier. I was going to ask you your favorite story in the collection, if you have a favorite. I mean, it might change all the time, but you were saying Killer Things.
Yeah.
And moving on from Black Tickets, who are some of your other influences?
Oh.
Did you have specific influences for each story, for your writing overall? Tell us whatever you want to tell us.
I mean, I think overall, my biggest influences have been writers who do write. I mean, I am a sucker for really lovely prose. Like, I really love that really lyrical, poetic kind of style. So somebody like Kevin Brockmeyer, who is one of my teachers, like he's got I know, right? Like
that's amazing.
He's incredible. You know, like I love his stuff. And in that same category, I would put like Anthony Doerr, who I feel like got really, you know, blew up when his novel came out, but his short stories do tend to have this kind of magical element to them that the novel didn't, or that his second novel anyway didn't. So I love that kind of writing, but I also read a lot of like hard sci-fi, hardcore fantasy. I love that kind of writing, but then also a lot of Alice Munro and Jhumpa Lahiri, and I really like old short stories too, like those kind of late 1800s O. Henry and Guy de Maupassant, people like that, because they are really, they like the sense of plot is so central in those in a way that I think it's not in some contemporary writing. And I really like a good rollicking plot to carry me through. I like those kind of stories as well.
So it even says it in your bio. It says that you spent your childhood reading fantasy novels, and I was wondering if you would share some of your favorites.
Oh, sure. So I loved Madeleine L'Engle. I mean, not just A Wrinkle in Time, but I think I read like every Madeleine L'Engle book available. And I met her. She did a reading in Pittsburgh when she was in high school. And it was like when you see those videos of like young women meeting the Beatles in the, like that was me trying to talk to Madeleine L'Engle. So I was a huge fan of her. Who else did I love that I read a lot of? There were some just one-off books that I really liked. So Monica Furlong has a book called Wise Child, which is about this girl who gets adopted by the village witch and is like trained to be a witch, which is, I don't know, the imagery in it is gorgeous. And it was a very kind of, it did that thing that I try to do now in my writing, which is it took a very realistic approach to magic. Like it wasn't Harry Potter where it's like, you're going to learn these 3 words and do magic. It was like, we have to work really hard to pick all these herbs and grind them up and mix them together before we can do any magic with them. Sort of like if you read Circe, my gosh, Madeline Miller's,
Yep.
right? Similar kind of approach to magic. So I loved that one. What else? I know there was some sci-fi that I read a lot, and I'm just blanking on it at the moment. I did read, even when I was a kid, I read a lot of short stories. I've always really liked short stories. Connie Willis, Big fan of hers. Yeah.
She's great.
She's amazing.
So when you're writing your stories, do you go in expecting to add a touch of magical realism or a touch of fantasy, or are you like, let's just see, what happens?
It is always, let's just see what happens, but I have to say, at this point, I always kind of know that that's where I'm going. Like, I feel like the pieces I write that are purely realistic it's not that I never write them, but they're never my best work. And so they don't tend to end up, not that they get rejected for publication as much as like, I don't even send them out because I just don't feel like they have the same oomph to them. And so I'm not opposed to it. And certainly if I wrote something that was that way that I thought was good, I would try to publish it. I think it's partly my worldview that I think I do have a kind of old worldview where I do feel like magic is part of the world. And so it's hard for me to like just write a story where that's not in there.
Do you think spending so much time outside is part of that influence?
Absolutely, I do.
What's magical about the world?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, I have small kids now, but before I did, I used to do a lot of backpacking, usually by myself. So I would be like, just out in the middle of some mountain range or some whatever, no other human beings around. And there is to me just something, yes, absolutely magical about that is for me impossible to recreate in a more mundane environment.
So, having not read the introduction in the paperback, you might have touched on it, but were these, I've lost all my words. Did you pick these in a specific order? Was it hard to decide which order? Which of these stories did you finish first, or did you write first all the way through?
Yes. So, hold on, I'm gonna look at the table of contents so I know correctly. So Robert Greenman and the Mermaid is the oldest one, and Pleiades was pretty shortly after that. And the last one I wrote was the title story. And all the others kind of spread out in between. It was, so I knew I wanted to start with The World by Night because it starts with this young woman like going down into this cave and kind of entering another world. And so I felt like it was a good starting place for that reason. And I knew that I wanted to end with Pleiades because I don't know, of all the stories here, I felt like the ending of that one is most about, like she says, like this is the place where things end. So it felt like really, okay, this is the ending of the book. And I knew Manus, the one with the blobby aliens, I wanted somewhere near the end because it is the weirdest. And I felt like and it's also quite long. And so I felt like if you started people with that, they might get scared off. But other than that, I did not have like a really firm plan for how these would be laid out. And partly it was, I talked about it with my agent, who I'm really a big fan of. I really trust her judgment. And we talked a bit about what would be the best order. So, yeah.
And so we keep going back to this, but I was going to ask you, because the title story, I was going to ask you if that was your favorite story. Like, how does the title story end up being the title of your book? Like, how did you choose that story?
Yeah, so I once I had written the introduction, which basically says, here, I'll read a little. The introduction is not long, but I'll read like just the very beginning of it.
Okay.
If I can flip to it fast enough. Okay, so it says, in the old times, people knew better than to trust the gods. Deities were tempestuous, even capricious. They could bring harvest or drought, make your mouth drip with jewels or snakes, and their reasons were often mysterious. And then it goes on to talk about how people these days want something more dependable than that, and so they put their faith in other things: science, nature, psychology, industry, massive forces defined by clear rules and logic, or so we convince ourselves right up until our new gods start to misbehave. So that was already written before I chose the title. And once I had that written, I thought, like, this story title is really fits with that introduction. And I'm going to pick it for that reason because it seems to apply to the book as a whole. I will say the publisher was not thrilled with this title. They were too concerned that people would think it was a religious book of some sort. And I will say, I have definitely run into a few people who thought exactly, like I've had very unhappy people at my readings who thought that they were showing up for some sort of religious lecture. But I think I also just liked it as a title. I thought it was an interesting title. So I went with it.
I realize now that I skipped over that story when I was asking you about the stories in all the names that you forgot. I was wondering if you gave the young women in that story their powers because they seem to have no power in any other part of their lives.
Yes, absolutely.
Which might be obvious to everyone, and I don't know, but I'm slow to pick up on these things. So
no, I mean, I've had plenty of people ask. I don't think it is obvious to everyone, but it definitely was. I was reading articles about them. I first read an article in the New York Times on the 1-year anniversary of the Chibok schoolgirls being kidnapped. And the article in the Times basically said, like, hey, it's been a year. Most of these girls are still in captivity and the US news cycle has moved on. But like, just a reminder that this is happening. And then it really upset me, and also I think made me feel guilty because it was true that I had forgotten about it. And so I started reading more articles about them. And part of what I learned was like, that was this big international news story, but in fact, Boko Haram just does that all the time. Like they're constantly kidnapping young women and also young men. And that's just kind of their general MO. And yes, the aspect of it that I think was most, and I also was reading about that a lot of these women, when they return home, if they manage to escape or they're ransomed or whatever and they return home, they have a really hard time because a lot of their, not only are they traumatized and have PTSD and what have you, but a lot of their home communities are not really happy to have them back for various reasons. So yes, that idea of their powerlessness and having so much taken away from them was just eating at me. And I did want to write a story where I felt like they had some, I mean, revenge is honestly what I would say. Like that's, it's not, I feel like revenge is not a thing that we typically think of as a good thing, but that's what I was thinking of.
So where did my question go? So here's most authors' least favorite question. Are you working on anything now? And would you consider writing a novel? Have you written, I mean, you may have, people always say like, this is their first novel, and sometimes it feels like this is their first published novel, but you have no idea what they've been working on.
So I am working on a novel. I have written, I know. Well, it's funny. I keep waffling between like, is it a novel or is it linked stories? Because I feel like it's kind of halfway between those two territories right now. I'm going to call it a novel for the time being. I have been working on it, and I was very fortunate to get an NEA grant this year. So I was able to take the year off from
Congratulations.
What's that? Oh, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It obviously turned out to be the best year ever to take a year off from teaching.
Right.
Not know at the time. So yeah, so I'm working on that. And I have in the past tried to write a novel that I never finished it, but I got about 250 pages into it and scrapped it. It just wasn't working.
No, you haven't cannibalized it at all, or?
No, I really haven't. I haven't. I have still been writing stories at the same time. So I have a couple stories coming out. I don't think I'm gonna ever stop writing stories because I just do love that story form. But to me, it really was a thing of if you want to publish a story collection, like I'm sure you know this, Liberty, but if you're outside of the publishing industry, like publishers do not like to publish story collections. Or they do, but they know they're not going to make much money off of it, so they're reluctant. And so I spent so many years just being like, stop asking me to write a novel. That's not what I want to work on. I want to work on these stories. That's what I'm doing. And then I finally got to publish my book. I think it kind of freed me up mentally to feel like, okay, I can try this again, because I don't have to be on the defensive and trying to convince someone that my stories are worth publishing. So yeah.
So I'm gonna ask you, like, I'm gonna do one more question, but it's kind of like a million questions because I have a million questions. What do you like to do when you're not writing? Do you have any other, do you have any hobbies or anything else that you enjoy doing? And also, have you read anything good lately? And also, one last question. Would you like to tell us about your friend's book that came out in February, since they were not able to go on book tour?
Yes, I will. So I will start with that one. The book is called The Illness Lesson by Claire Booth.
Yes, so good.
Great book. Claire is one of these people that I read her short story collection, and then after the fact realized she lived in the same city as me, and I had to hunt her down and become friends with her because I love her collection so much.
Yeah.
And the novel is fabulous. It is set in a girls' boarding school in the late 1800s, where all the girls start to develop this mysterious illness. It's fantastic, and her prose is just gorgeous, gorgeous. So I recommend that book for sure. So there was that. Wait, what was the question before that?
Hobbies? Things you like to spend time doing besides writing?
I'm doing. I really everything. So I do have 2 small kids, so that is a lot of my time, especially now.
Right.
Like confined to spaces. I do still like to spend a lot of time outside. I would say all my hobbies that are not writing are intentionally like non-mental hobbies. So I really like to sew, and I like to cook, because in both cases I just like that feeling of doing something with my hands that just occupies a different part of my brain than, I shouldn't say non-mental, but it's a different part of my brain than the writing. So I like that. And what was the third? There was a third question.
Have you read anything good lately besides Claire's book?
Yes. So I finally, like, belatedly read Lily King's Euphoria. I just
very cool.
Blown away by. Damon Young's essay collection, What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, which is also amazing and funny at the same time as being very thought-provoking. And right now I'm in the middle of Charlie Jane Anders' The City in the Middle of the Night, which is also
very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. And you might already know this, but did you know that the cover of Lily King's book is actual tree bark?
I did not know that. Oh, it's that like rainbow baobab.
Rainbow eucalyptus, yep.
Yes.
That's like my cool trivia fact that I know about books that I like to share with everyone. Because I thought it was a painting. And then I found that out.
Well, in the book, she describes at some point this tree bark, and I was like, I don't understand, how can tree bark look like what is being described here? And so I went, okay, oh, that's so cool. You made me so happy.
Well, this was really fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. Thank you for offering to do this.
Of course.
You know, we just got delayed by a few months, but you know, thank you so much for answering my questions. I have a million more, but I'm not going to keep everyone here all night, especially when they're in rooms without air conditioning. But this was so great.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate talking to you, and thank you guys for logging in. Nice to meet you.
Yes, nice to meet you, and thank you to Print a Bookstore for asking me to help out today with my favorite book of 2018, one of my favorite books of all time. Oh, can I ask you one more? I'm gonna ask you one more quick question.
Yeah.
Do you have a preference?
Oh gosh, no, I really do like them both, but I will tell you
they're so different, but they're fabulous. That's why I had to have them both.
I will tell you that this one, initially, they tried to make it match the color scheme of the hardback, so it was a cream cover with a bright green tail, and to me, it looked like a beach book, and I was like, this is not a beach read. If anyone buys this thinking it's a beach read, they're going to be really upset with me. Could we make it dark? And they were like, oh, okay. So I'm proud that I give like a little smidgen of creative input on this one, but I do like them both.
Well, they're both wonderful, and I can't wait to see what you have next, but no pressure.
It'll be fun.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and have a good night.
All right, good night.
Bye.